It's the week ending Saturday, the 6th of January, and this is The Week Unwrapped. In the past 7 days, we've seen an explosive new book about Trump's first year in office, a phone call between North and South Korea for the first time in 2 years, and another crisis in NHS hospitals. But we're here to bring you some of the stories that passed under the radar this week. Big news, not making headlines right now, but with repercussions for all our lives. I'm Olly Mann, and let's unwrap the week. And with me from the week's digital team are Kari Wilkin, Arion McNicoll and Mike Starling. Happy New Year, folks.
Happy New Year.
Happy New Year.
And starting the show this year, it's Arion. What do you think this week should be remembered for?
So rather than a queen, should there be a president or even a Wizard of Oz?
So why should we be a republic? What is the pitch? It is, as I said at the outset, a straightforward issue of principle and national pride. I am an Australian. I am proud to say so. Our head of state should be someone who can say the same. Our head of state should be one of us. Our president should be a resident.
Australian Prime Minister Malcolm Turnbull speaking last month at the 25th anniversary of the Australian Republican movement. Arion, you've been an Australian in our midst for the last year, just sort of slowly building our trust, and now, knives out, let's kill the Queen, is basically what you're saying, is it?
Yeah, sure. Not me personally, but in this case, our Prime Minister.
The elected representative of the people of Australia.
Elected representative of me and others.
Yeah. Is he, do you think, accurately reflecting why people elected him? Because it seems to me republicanism in Australia, big thing in politics because you have to have a position on it, but the people don't really care.
He's an interesting case in point because he actually led the Republican movement back in the 90s, which ultimately led to a failed referendum on the question of whether Australia should become a republic. But he was the figurehead, and years later, he is now the Prime Minister. So it's not actually totally one thing or the other. In his case, he is a bit of both. But the question of whether now is a moment where republicanism should be back on the agenda is, I would say, not necessary. It was kind of a thing that he floated and just put out there, and in fact then rapidly withdrew a couple of days later and said, well, actually, I quite like Queen Elizabeth, and I think we should hold on to her, and then we should have a republic after she's done.
Okay, so before I ask the Poms what they think, why have you chosen this as your moment of the week?
I think it's significant because I think that Australia actually has fluctuated in terms of its relationship with the monarch, and certainly in the wake of that failed referendum, Australia stepped back from the brink, and following the emergence of William and Harry as rather more popular royals, monarchy in Australia became more popular. But the question of what Australia's going to do once the Queen
Don't even say the words.
away,
Don't even say the words, Arion. We all know it's inevitable.
I think will be mirrored elsewhere, and I think that we'll see, I think it'll be a really testing moment for the monarchy once Charles comes to the throne.
Well, exactly, Kari. It's going to be a testing moment for the monarchy when Charles comes to power, regardless of whether you're British or in the Commonwealth. If he does, do you think they're going to skip? They're not going to skip.
I think they could skip.
I don't think they're going to skip. But let's say Charles does. It's going to be a crisis for everyone. They're all going to be saying, OK, what do we think now about the monarchy? So is Arion's thesis right? Maybe this is the moment that Australia's going to consider this again.
I think it's time for everyone to consider it again. I think it's high time people did have their say, because people increasingly do want to get rid of them. Polls show that in this country, up to 40% want to get rid of them.
So an increasing minority.
I think if they want to bolster their position and they feel confident that they're supported, a democratic referendum to choose them would be a perfect way to do it.
Yeah,
and if
that
they
really
lose,
worked for Theresa May, didn't it?
Yeah.
Clearly ahead in the polls. Now's the time.
And I must say, I'm not necessarily sure that if a referendum was held in the UK on whether you should have a monarchy or not.
Yeah, don't overstep the mark.
I'm not one of you yet. I don't think that the UK would reject.
No, I think they probably would, but it would be nice to be given the choice.
If it isn't actually a persuasive influence on their day-to-day lives, and they mostly think of it in benign terms, that's exactly why they'd keep it, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, actually, looking at today's Herald Sun poll, they're asking, do you want Australia to become a republic? It's 54% no.
Well, that's so Sun.
But I'm just saying,
it's a conservative paper.
It's quite close.
The majority of Australians are in favour of a republic. If the question was, should we be a republic? And the reason why it was complicated.
Isn't that the case in the UK? Like, if you ask people in a poll, do you think it's fair we have a royal family? You know, wouldn't a better system be that we elect everyone who represents us? The answer is yes. If you ask people, should we abolish the House of Lords and abolish the royal family and replace them with an elected president that would come from one of the political parties, people say no.
Sure, but that's not a reason to maintain the present system, is it?
Well, it appears to be. It's working quite well for the last 100 years.
Sure,
but what does the royal family do? I think you have to just look at them in terms of a business. Are they generating money for the country?
So to answer that, yes, they are generating money for the UK,
well, that's
clearly.
not necessarily clear, but they cost the UK a lot, and it's very hard to
If you ask tourists why
exactly.
they're here, they'll say Harry Potter and the Queen and Shakespeare.
But
She's
wouldn't
right
they come
up there.
anyway?
Okay, but let's put Britain to one side, because I think it is clear that they benefit Britain in that way. I'm not speaking as a royalist, by the way. I'm trying to be objective. But for Australia, I think that is a question, isn't it?
That's
How
the
do
thing. What's
they
it
benefit
doing
Australia?
for Australia?
I think that's right. And if you go to Australia, as most of you in this room have even lived there, that's the case, that people feel very remote and removed from their head of state. But not only that, it is a weird vestigial part of a former system that happened of empire and colonialism, that was given a certain amount of power that was not meant to be exercised. But actually there was this really controversial moment in 1975 when the Governor-General stepped in and used his power to dismiss the Whitlam government, a sort of Labour government at the time. And it was incredibly controversial. And notionally, the same thing could happen here, could it not?
Untangle for us. What do you mean? What could happen here?
There was a really interesting play that morphed into a TV show last year, King Charles III. Did you see
I did,
that?
yeah, brilliant. Yeah.
And it posed this very question, which is, what if Charles assumes the throne and he decides that he can't, in good conscience, sign a bill into law? And it turns into this constitutional standoff where he, on the one hand, is kind of saying, look, army, support me. I am the head of the army, after all. And the parliament is saying, you're not meant to actually be doing this. And so it is floating this question. It's looking into what would happen if the monarch chose to flex their constitutional muscle.
I think we can all guess what would happen, though, in reality, which is that the survival instinct of all of the palace courtiers would kick in, and they'd realise that the best thing is to carry on as they have for the past 80 years, looking pretty, not saying anything significant, and being everything to everyone.
I think that's quite possible. But the fact that the Governor-General in 1975 didn't do that, and the Crown came to have an impact on Australian politics, it's never gone away. And for Australians, particularly Labour voting Australians, but everyone really, there's been this 20, 30-year scar of people going, this did once have an impact on our politics, and that's why I think that it's going to die eventually.
I mean, it's the rest of the Commonwealth that I'm thinking of as well, because, I mean, Australia, actually, there is a more direct connection with Britain. It might not be one that they're proud of, but it's there. But, you know, some of the sort of African and Asian nations that still have the Queen as the head of the Commonwealth, it's just bizarre, isn't it?
Yeah, it's somehow quite offensive. Canada also want to get rid of the royal family. I think a poll in July found that 53% of Canadians want to cut royal ties once the Queen is no longer with us. And yeah, what are they gaining from the royals? It's not like the royals are generating any income for them. It's not like they're sort of a figurehead that represents their country.
They're also not doing the thing that they do here on a daily basis. You know, on a daily basis, Princess Anne, you know, whatever you think of her, goes to 3 events, has boring conversations over lunch, cuts a ribbon, and essentially boosts that industry for those people. That doesn't happen if you're in Canada, does it?
We'll have the Commonwealth Games this year, though, so at least you have that to look forward to.
Oh, yes, talk about that, Sportman. Commonwealth Games, what could happen to that?
I don't like the Commonwealth Games. I don't watch it. I don't like it because it's England as a team and not Team GB, which is always a bit weird. And I'm a Team GB when it comes to Olympics and athletics, but it's a big thing in the sense of the investment that the Gold Coast have done. They're using it as regeneration.
And Australia likes winning an international competition.
And they're going to win loads. It's going to be, everyone's going to be tanned in their
especially ones Americans can't enter. That's ideal.
Exactly. Yeah.
So in a word then, has Turnbull fired the starting gun on every nation in the world, possibly including Britain, discussing what happens after Elizabeth?
Yes. I think that it's going to take a long time. I don't think we're going to see an Australian republic this year and then a domino effect of a Canadian and a New Zealand republic and the rest of the former Commonwealth. But I think that just underlines the popularity of Elizabeth as a ruler and as a person, not just here but in Australia as well. I think that, you know, in the end, even the poster boy for Australian republicanism ended up kind of doing a bit of an about-face and describing himself as an Elizabethan and suggesting that at the point where
Well, the policy amended, didn't it? When she dies, then we'll have another discussion
think about it. So, it could be another 30 or 40 years.
Kari, you're next. What do you think this week will be remembered for?
I think it's the week we ask, should doctors pull the plug on video games?
Time flies when you're having fun.
It's just a nice escape from the real world and relaxes you.
But what starts as a hobby can potentially turn into an addiction.
If you play too much, you're not going to be studying as much. You're not going to do well in your finals. You're not going to get enough sleep, and it wheels out of control really fast.
So what could be some signs of a video game addiction? Experts say one is the inability to control when and how someone plays games.
6 hours of video gaming versus 3 for someone else. These could have significantly different, impacts on their lives.
That was Ethan Fikau of KCRG TV9 News speaking to gamers in Iowa this week. Kari, what's the story here?
So the World Health Organization have released a draft version of the 11th International Classification of Disease, which is basically the handbook used by researchers and doctors to track and diagnose disease. And it's the first update since the early 90s, so it's quite a big deal. And they want to include gaming disorder as a mental health disorder. So we're talking about alongside the likes of depression and schizophrenia. They're describing it as a pattern of persistent or recurrent gaming behaviour that may include impaired control over gaming activities to the extent that gaming takes precedent over other life interests and daily activities.
And what's been the reaction?
A lot of anger online, obviously, because this is attacking something that a lot of people exactly
what does that
what
mean?
to expect.
Yeah.
But no, a lot of people are saying this is scientifically unsound, that as yet the research is still very much undecided as to whether gaming is actually bad for you mentally. There's so much conflicting research. There have been things saying that, up to 10% of US people have an addiction. A more recent University of Oxford study said that actually, while younger people do spend a lot of time on their screens, they're intertwining it with their daily life. So they're, incorporating it into homework, that sort of thing. There have been scare stories about people dropping dead after playing games for 24 hours, but you have to assume there was something wrong with them anyway.
Okay, yeah, so on that point, if you're someone who plays a video game for 24 hours, is that the fault of the video game, or do you actually have a pre-existing mental health condition in the first place? I mean, what kind of person stays up for 24 hours playing a video game anyway?
Exactly. It's often tends to be it's more symptomatic of some other underlying mental health issue. You don't sit in front of your computer for 24 hours if you've got a sort of balanced, fulfilled life.
But are things like gambling covered on the WHO's ICD list or not?
Yes, they are.
You can see that they're similar.
I think it's arguable that gaming addiction is actually a subset of gambling addiction.
Okay.
For many people, it's a hobby, but, many people spend hours and hours reading, but you don't ever hear someone talking about reading addiction.
Yeah, and it's interesting. When kids started reading more, it was talked about as something that was unhealthy for them, wasn't it?
Exactly. This has happened.
Too much time in their own imagination.
There were similar scares about novels in the 18th century, about comic books and rock and roll in the 50s, about video nasties in the 80s. I think it's this underlying assumption that gaming is a waste of time, which it's therefore labelled an addiction.
Let's do that then. Is gaming a waste of time, Mike?
It's taken over Hollywood for a start. As an industry, it's just massive and it's very creative. And if
you mean in terms of financial returns, it's taken over Hollywood,
absolutely. I mean, if you look at schooling, I used to cover education, and we used to write a lot about gaming in schools. How there are actual developers who are actually working with education professionals to create classroom-based games for. And that's
a lot of maths homework is often done in online things. Now, where it's like times table rock stars, for example. That's
I'm at the age of 4 or 5, and then they have that right through to 18. That generation, are they going to be addicted to gaming?
I'm of the BBC Basic generation. Like, I went to school and we had one of the educational computers in the classroom, and we did sometimes play for half an hour a game based around maths. We still went home and tried to make Lara Croft bend over, though. There was not a great deal of educational value in what we were doing recreationally.
So what? If you're enjoying it and it's relaxing
fine, but you can't really use the educational argument, can you?
I think you can. I think it can make kids more keen on learning. Try and get a kid to sit down and learn their times tables and not having it. Turning it into a game online, great way to get them to learn.
But also gaming broadly can have positive effects, like those brain training games that adults choose. It's not
of dubious scientific qualification.
But I think that both the hand-eye coordination stuff and a certain amount of recall and problem-solving components in contemporary gaming, we don't need studies to know that they're likely to be good for you in the same way that sitting down with a Sudoku is going to be good for you.
At least it's interactive. You're not just sat in front of a TV screen.
Right.
People don't talk about TV addiction. I'm sure people spend far longer in front of the TV on average.
And gaming isn't a solitary pursuit.
And the issue is, I suppose, we saw some of this hysteria about 10 years ago around Second Life as well, if you remember that. Yeah. So I'm going to use that terminology. The idea is that you spend longer in your second life, in your fourth dimension, than you do in your real life. And maybe as grown-ups who don't play that much games, we can think about this in terms of social media. You know, I am sitting here thinking, I posted something an hour ago, how many likes has it got? You know, that's in my mind, and I don't consider myself addicted to social media, but I acknowledge that these gamified techniques hook you in and are part of the way that you then encounter the real world. And if you're a child, are you prepared for that? And, you know, they are designed to keep you hooked. As previously discussed in The Week Unwrapped, number 47, if you want to revisit Cameron Tate's take on this.
Yeah, so exactly. So something like Candy Crush Saga is designed to appeal to that part of the brain that causes addiction. So certainly games are built with addictive qualities.
But maybe it should be included as a subset of gambling addiction then, rather than sort of putting this whole stigma over gaming as a whole, which is going to confuse a lot of parents.
Or maybe
kids
by
may
the
just
WHO differentiating it, we're having this conversation which throws a spotlight on it. If they just chucked it in under gambling, you know, they're trying to make a point, aren't they? What they're saying is,
I think there's enough discussion
psychological
about whether gaming. I mean, this has been an issue for a long time. In Asian countries, they're really concerned about it. You actually get gaming addiction camps in China now, which is basically a boot camp for kids where they're sent off and have to go cold turkey and have this sort of military regime.
The internet cafe culture of Japan and Korea, there are places where you would see 20 kids logged in, all playing mass player games, and it's interesting to see, but they are addicted.
And maybe that's the point, that there's lots of activities that can be addictive for some people, but not everyone. So the problem.
Some people are addicted to gardening. I mean, you can put that tag on anything.
Yeah, you could say
yes,
that.
But what are the psychological consequences of being addicted to gardening?
But what are the psychological consequences of being addicted to gaming?
Well, presumably there are some, and that's why the WHO
they haven't actually proven any negative effects on mental or physical health.
Okay, we all know anecdotally, don't we, teenagers that we've met that aren't very good at communicating face-to-face. That is, like I say, I don't have scientific research, but that is a clear anecdotal consequence of having spent a lot of time in computer games.
They've retreated into computer games. Are we not confusing cause and effect here?
What you're essentially saying, Kari, is people are a bit harsh on video games. I mean, we've had like F1 drivers, haven't we, who have said that they've come through learning via video games. We've had drone pilots learning on video games. Is there anything else?
Commercial pilots, the simulators is a massive way of training for Boeing, for Airbus. That's how these guys, they train, don't they? A certain amount of hours before they get in the sky.
But also, as Mike was saying earlier, they've overtaken Hollywood, and not just as a money-making enterprise, but also as a storytelling medium. There are some fantastic stories that are being told through the medium of gaming. And in fact, very few that now don't require a little bit of brain interface with the subject at hand. Lots of the top creatives are ending up in the world of gaming, writing great stories.
You're all nodding. I mean, every time someone says that to me and then I see what they're talking about, I watch it and I think, well, that's a cliche load of crap. Like the script is always terrible. The acting's not great.
There are some great games out there where you can choose the storyline, and there are thousands and thousands of different outcomes depending on what you choose. And perhaps that's the future of TV, that you no longer sit there passively, that you will choose the outcome, certainly to some extent, of the plots, and that is clearly stimulating you mentally.
It's called reality TV.
Yeah, oh yeah,
you vote
that's
people
the
off.
one.
But actually, I mean, that's really what's happening, isn't it? Is we're seeing the effect of gaming on every interaction that we're having. It's that the lessons that have been learned through gaming are being put into everything else. I mentioned social media. Another one, for example, is Slack. It's sort of a bit like WhatsApp, but professionally based. And that's what we use to write this show when we're all contributing our ideas in advance. And that gamifies a work conversation, doesn't it? You can like something, you can put a picture or a Bitmoji in response to something, post a video, make yourself feel good about your profile, change your avatar. It's all gaming, but for work.
And there's questions about where it's going to go next with both virtual reality and augmented reality that will have gaming stitched even more closely into our everyday lives.
And finally this week, it is our player of the week. It's Mike. What do you think this week will be remembered for?
Football's festive fixture fiasco.
What I saw, or everybody see in the last weeks, how many injuries the players they have. So we're going to kill them. So I think the federation, I don't know who are the bosses, they have to reflect a little bit. That is not normal, guys. I know the show must go on, and it doesn't matter with which guy's show must go on. The manager is here, another one, and the players are not here, another ones. But that is not normal.
Manchester City boss Pep Guardiola, him out of the football, speaking after his team played 10 games in a month. So, Mike, this is the story that the Premier League is being worked too hard.
Well, every year we talk about it, and we were discussing this topic, whether we should talk about it in this podcast. And the festive fixtures is a huge talking point because the rest of Europe has the time off. So in England and Scotland and a little bit in Holland, we still play. The reason we're talking about this is not because of the amount of fixtures. We know there's too many, but TV money generates that interest and it forces the schedule. So the clubs can't complain about that, nor can the fans. But the big issue this year is the number of injuries. None of these players are ever 100% match fit. And at this time of year, they're probably about 70 or 80%, which means if you're not match fit, you're more likely to get soft tissue injuries.
Sure.
And the numbers are pretty much saying that. I mean, we're looking at the PremierInjuries.com reports. That, honestly, and they've been quoted by everyone, so they're obviously a decent source. In 2017-18, 136 injuries in December compared to 115 last year. And then also soft tissue injuries have gone up by 20-30%. And this is the issue. In the long term, one player could go on strike if he gets injured because he's been forced to play too many games. It's a big talking point.
Okay, talk me through how a player strike works. I mean, do they get paid then?
The players in rugby have been talking about this. It's been actually threatened because they have talked about extending the season in rugby from 9 to 10 months. And the players are already knackered. And there's been a huge injury issue in rugby union professionally in England. I mean, if the Premier League wanted it, they'd have 40 teams in it and they would play twice a day if they could get the TV coverage. I mean, Pep Guardiola says, we're going to kill them. Okay, unless someone's got a heart defect, I don't think that's literally going to happen. But if one of his big players gets injured...
It could kill their career, though, couldn't
absolutely.
it? You know?
Absolutely. I mean, this is it. I mean, they get one knee injury now and then another...
If that's the prime year of their footballing career, then that's gone.
And the other talking point is that the rest of Europe is off and their players will go to next year's World Cup feeling a little bit fresher.
But also, isn't that sort of from a footballer's point of view, that's really what's going to happen, isn't it? Forgetting about strikes, international footballers who can get millions wherever they go will choose not to come to English clubs.
Absolutely.
If they're that bothered about it.
Yeah. I still think the top players don't come to England. That's the fact.
Do you think that's why?
Absolutely. And also the weather. Why would you want to play in middle of December in rain when you can play in March, not in December, and you're still living in Barcelona or Madrid? I'd rather be there.
How much of this is capitalism's fault? Because from what Mike said, it sounds like actually the sensible decision would be not to force players to play if they're likely to hurt themselves. If they were animals, that would probably be, what people would say.
Oh, it's such a multi-million-pound industry that obviously they're going to try and make as much money as they can, and players are being paid a lot. So my sympathy is limited, to be honest. Sky pays about 11 million per game. BT Sport pays 7.6 million a game. I appreciate that these people have to work hard, but at the risk of being offensive, so do a lot of people.
Yeah, and I think that the FA knows that given that everyone else is taking some time off, they can run their fixtures across the festive period and make a whole lot of dosh. So actually the economic argument is the argument, surely. The FA doesn't care about players' careers and all of that. They just
but that's what I'm getting at. So from that point of view, is there something a bit broken in the way that football runs? I mean, the FA should care about footballers, shouldn't it?
Presumably,
leaving aside how much money they earn.
I'd say so because they do need to protect their top talent, because as soon as your best players are out, then there's no point to watch the Premier League.
Is there an argument for paying the players slightly less so that there's less money sloshing around, but then they can have slightly longer careers if they're not having to...
The rugby players, one of the England players said that. He said, I would be prepared to take a pay cut if it meant I was playing less. But he was playing...
So would everybody, and that's what Kari was saying, isn't it? It's like the old sort of, Chris Evans wants to do 4 breakfast shows a week, not 5.
To prolong his career by 4 years. He reckons this rugby player was saying if he plays at this current level, he's only got 2 more years. He wants 4 more years.
I'm always staggered by the amount of football players who seem to be guided primarily by money rather than other considerations in their decision making. They'll go to some anonymous club in Turkey for the big bucks rather than staying with a club that's got a shot at a title elsewhere.
Perhaps that's because their careers are so short they can't afford to be too picky. They've got to stockpile lots of money before it's over.
Sure, but how many millions of pounds do you need?
Quite a lot if you're living that lifestyle.
So.
If you look at English football during the festive season, we're all talking about Premier League, but the same schedule is right down to non-league. If you look at the 5th tier, the league below the professional ranks, these guys are still playing the same amount, and they are not getting paid, and the fans are still having to go to these games.
Whoa. When you say the fans have to go to these games...
The fans are paying to go to these games.
To take football back to its roots as kind of like working man's entertainment, from that point of view, it does make sense, doesn't it, that when most people are on holiday, the 2-week period the nation is on holiday, that's when the football matches should be.
Yes. It is entertainment, isn't it?
So, I mean, if anything, shouldn't it be that they take November off, really? Maybe
you're right, because like we were talking about the traditional Boxing Day game, horse racing and football is the big thing that happens in the UK on that day. Nothing. All right, shopping is submerged, but generally,
and don't forget the Boxing Day hunt.
Boxing Day hunt, but yeah, people do go to football. I know people who only go to football on Boxing Day. But for the players, I think actually it's quite a bad thing at the moment. It's just they've had to this year. They've had to cram in an extra round of games because of the World Cup next year. And the Premier League said, we did ask the clubs about it and no one complained. Every club complains around this time because they're all knackered. Okay, they just need to reduce the number of teams in the Premier League, I'd say.
I am going to hold your feet to the fire of our format, Mike. I mean, so what? Is this the year that this all changed? You know, in 2018, are people going to be saying this Christmas, last Christmas we really pushed them too hard?
No, I think next year's going to be even worse. 2019 season is when the new TV rights deal is going to be negotiated for at the moment. That is being negotiated. And that's when they said, Strictly versus Premier League on a Saturday night. There will be more games at more different hours. So I think that it will get even worse.
I read that West Brom made a formal complaint to the Premier League. Is that going to do anything?
The schedule's going to be a nightmare either way for every club.
Shrug of his shoulders, I can report, listeners. He's doing a shrug of his shoulders. West Brom, they're the Liberal Democrats of the Premier League. That is it from this edition of The Week Unwrapped. My thanks to Mike Starling, Kari Wilkin and Arion McNicoll. For more from us at The Week, why not visit theweek.co.uk? You'll have a great time there. You can also sign up to our free email newsletter, The Weekday. Or, of course, I'd highly recommend getting the magazine delivered direct to your door. Just head to theweek.co.uk/subscribe. Now, attentive listeners will have noticed that this is episode number 52, which means, maths fans, we have completed a year of shows discussing underreported stories just like these. So happy birthday to us. Happy birthday, folks.
Happy birthday.
Hi. Yeah, great. They're all available on our podcast feed. So if you want to go back and see what we were saying a year ago and whether our predictions were right, just search for The Week Unwrapped on your app of choice. I've been Olly Mann. Our music is by Tom Morby, the producer, Matt Hill at Rethink Audio. Until we meet again to unwrap next week, bye-bye.